All right, we talked a little bit about economic performance and we looked a little bit at some economic problems that the country has to deal with sometimes. So now we want to take a look at the tools that the government has to deal with these problems. So, first, we're going to start with fiscal policy, which means we're talking about taxing and spending. So, here we have a couple of folks. We have Barack Obama with his American Jobs Act, and we have former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan with his Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so you see both of them are talking about jobs. We'll talk about different approaches that liberals and conservatives will take to trying to create jobs and to try to boost economic performance. First up, fiscal policy. When we talk about fiscal policy, we just mean taxing and spending policies. Remember, taxes are controlled by Congress and they have to be approved by the president. So the president and Congress together have control over fiscal policy. These are the decisions that make up the budget, like what is the money going to be spent on and how do we get the money. We're going to talk about expansionary policy, which means that the government is trying to get the economy to expand. And this can also be talked about a lot in terms of what we call stimulus. So you've probably heard that term a lot lately. The government has done a lot of stimulus. And in the case that we're probably most familiar with, the government sent money to American people. And the point there is to encourage American people to buy stuff to boost economic growth in the country. On the other hand, we'll have contractionary policy. Contractionary policy will be used when it's time to slow economic growth. So if the government thinks the economy is growing too fast, they may try to slow it down through different ways of, taxing and spending policy. Expansionary fiscal policy means that when the economy is shrinking, the government can take steps to try to stimulate it. The government can try to make the economy grow. The government has a lot of control over being able to influence what we call aggregate demand or like the total demand, which really just means like all of our like collective demand for goods and services. So, for example, like during the coronavirus pandemic, when the government has like sent me a check, what am I going to do with that check? I'm probably going to buy something. I'm going to spend it on, maybe spend it on the things I need, or maybe I'll just buy something silly that I wouldn't have normally purchased because I have this extra money. But either way, what they're doing is they're getting my personal demand to increase, right? They're getting me to want and be able to buy a good or service. When the government is doing this in fiscal policy, when they cut taxes, that gives people more money of their own money. And so this causes an increase in aggregate demand. So when you reduce taxes, people have more money to spend, so they want to go out and buy more stuff. That's one way the government can influence demand in the country. When they increase spending, it does the same thing. This sparks an increase in aggregate demand because it means more people have jobs. So, like Joe Biden is proposing his American Jobs Plan, and that includes a lot of projects for the government, like fixing roads and fixing bridges and building wind power farms and things like that. All of those mean that the government's going to hire people to work, so more people will have money, so more people will go out and buy stuff. So this is going to sound like common sense, but we got to go through it step by step, make sure we can connect the effect of reducing unemployment to the cause of cutting taxes. So when the government cuts taxes, when they reduce the amount of money you have to pay in taxes, that means you have more of your own money to spend. When you have more of your own money to spend, you're probably going to use that. You're going to go buy goods and services from businesses. And when businesses get bigger, like when they become busier, they're selling more goods, they're producing more services for people, they're probably going to need to hire more workers in order to meet the demand. So in this case, if the government has cut taxes, they've probably caused businesses to hire more workers. So by cutting taxes, the government can reduce unemployment. The government can also do this by increasing spending. When the government spends money, and the government spends money on like projects, or like maybe it adds money to like the benefits people get or stuff like that. When the government spends more money, this is going to reduce unemployment too. When the government is like doing new projects, like fixing all the bridges, or building new schools or anything like that, they have to hire workers. So that starts us off at a place of already increasing the number of jobs. But like, think about hiring workers. Like, workers are out like doing this work, which means that they are getting more income, and with their increased income, they are creating more demand in the economy, right? Their increase in income is going to lead to them buying more goods and services, which will do the same thing, cause businesses to get busier, and businesses will have to hire more workers. So when the government has increased spending, the government has reduced unemployment as well. All right, on the opposite side of things here, we have contractionary policy. Sometimes the economy is growing too fast. The government needs to act to slow the growth because they want to prevent inflation from occurring. They want to cause inflation to slow down. So the government here will find ways to reduce aggregate demand. They'll try to find ways to make us spend less. So they can do this by raising taxes, because then we'll have less money to spend. They can also do this by cutting spending, which will result in reduced aggregate demand because fewer people will have the jobs creating the income to go out and spend all the money. When the government raises taxes, that means that people are going to have less money to spend, right? A tax increase means that there's less money on your paycheck. So your check is smaller, so you're going to have to adjust to your reduced income. So you're probably going to buy less stuff. When businesses aren't selling as much stuff, this is like, basic economics here. If you have extra goods and people aren't buying them, you have to reduce the price of the goods, right? So when businesses have extra goods and services to get rid of, they've got to put things on sale. They've got to reduce the price of these things to get the customers to come buy them. And so in this line of thinking, when the government raises taxes, they can reduce inflation because they cause businesses to reduce the prices of goods and services. So here, a tool of fiscal policy is the government raising the taxes to force the businesses to reduce the price of goods. We get the same result when the government cuts its spending. So if the government is spending less money, the opposite of what happened before will happen here. So there are going to be fewer projects. There's going to be fewer benefits for people that rely on like government programs and things like that. So when government workers are laid off, like, construction projects stop and things like that, businesses with contracts are not as busy as they used to be. Workers who were working on these projects are going to be spending less money. There's going to be less total demand in the economy. And just like we said a minute ago, the businesses are going to end up reducing prices to try to encourage business. And so when the government decreases its spending here, they have forced the businesses to reduce their prices, which means that the government has reduced inflation. So there's an economic philosophy for government that they should be doing this a lot, and this is what we call Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics means that the government should be using its tools to tax and spend. Like, it can use tax cuts, or it can use like spending to stimulate economic activity, and that they should time this to deal with the highs and the lows of the business cycle. So when the economy looks like it's performing poorly, the government needs to do what it can to stimulate the economy. The government should act by reducing taxes and increasing spending. When the economy is bad, cut the taxes, spend more. You're probably going to run a deficit that way, right? You're going to spend a lot of money and you're not going to bring that much money in, but it's going to make the economy grow. When the economy is performing well, the government needs to slow it down. So when the economy is doing good, is a time to raise the taxes and cut the spending. This is like when the economy is performing well, that's exactly when you should try to reach a budget surplus. which is what was happening in the late 1990s when Bill Clinton did achieve the budget surplus. There was a whole lot of new economic growth because the internet was just starting. We had all sorts of new internet companies and things like that. So the economy is performing very well. It was easy to raise the taxes and reduce the spending and not have a lot of negative impact on people's lives. And we got to a budget surplus. So that's exactly what Keynesian economics would want to see happen. So we'll take a look at our business cycle one more time here. Uh, Here at the top, like at what would be a peak of the business cycle, we probably have inflation occurring. And that means it's time for the government to step in and decrease economic activity. So they can do that by, if the inflation is occurring, it is time for the government to slow the economy down by raising the taxes, cutting the spending. On the other side of things, when the economy has shrunk, it's reaching its low point. It's time for the government to intervene because unemployment is occurring at the low point here. The government needs to increase economic activity. So to increase economic activity, it's time to cut the taxes, raise the spending. So you see that this is kind of an ongoing cycle where the government's going to have to be taking action pretty often to try to make sure that the economy is never growing too fast and it's never shrinking too much. All right, so that's it for fiscal policy. So this was the taxing and the spending policies and how they can influence economic activity. So we want to remember that these are the tools that the Congress and the president can use to impact the economy. So now we're going to switch over and look at monetary policy and see what the central bank of the United States can do to influence economic performance.